season, and we're entering to a sermon series we began last week, which is probably a little bit unusual, a little bit different than what you're normally accustomed to when it comes to the Christmas season. But our challenge is to live and celebrate the Christmas season in an upside-down manner, because many of the things that have creeped in to our Christmas celebrations, though they are not bad, they're just less. And so rather than Christians adopting the position that we normally do, which is yelling and picketing and protesting everybody who doesn't do what they're supposed to do, what if we adopted a different way to celebrate Christmas? Rather than just wearing our Merry Christmas buttons and yelling at people and say, keep Christ in Christmas, Happy New Year, kind of a thing with people, right? Instead of doing those things, instead of trying to hold people accountable to something they never signed up for, what if we rather lived an upside-down Christmas and figure out a better way to demonstrate Christ's love and compassion for sinners just like us? And so what we've tried to do in this series is that we're adopting 4 spiritual disciplines that we want to try to live our Christmas season about. And last week we began the series by looking at worshiping fully. What does that mean? And then today, probably going to be a very unpopular sermon. That is, we're going to look at spending less. All right? Now, some of you are excited about this one. Yes, Bertha, listen to this one. This is going to be good. I mean, I know that's what you're already thinking about that. But if that is you, you've got to come back next week, because I'm going to talk about giving more. Yeah, I know. Some of you are not going to be nearly as excited about that. And then we will finally wrap up our series just as we get to the Christmas Eve service. We'll take from there this idea of loving all. That'll be our last sermon before that. And again, I used an illustration last week in our series as we began that illustrated that we don't need to think that Rudolph is bad, okay, that Frosty is evil. They're just less. And so last week I tried to use an illustration, and I got some feedback, and I don't always get positive feedback about everything, and so I actually got some pushback. I was not supposed to go over here and do this, so I'm going to do it anyway. Sorry, but that was supposed to be moved over there. But what happened was I got some feedback because I used an illustration, and there are some of you that have peanut allergies. And so when I used that illustration last week, those of you who have peanut allergies, you were just kind of fussing because you couldn't relate to it, and so I've had to switch my topics. It is tough pastoring a church. I just want you to know that with a variety of people. And so what I was just deciding to do, what I was trying to tell you all last week, and use this illustration, is that Christmas without Christ is not bad, okay? It's just less, okay? It's not bad. It's just less. It's like having a York peppermint patty, all right? And there's nothing wrong with York peppermint patties, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But Christ without Christmas is like that kind of peppermint patty. It's just less. But if you have Christ in your Christmas, even if it's to the periphery, even if he's just on the outside and all you do is read the Christmas story, that's more than less, right? But the more that your Christmas celebration can focus on the centerpiece being Christ, the more better that it gets. And so maybe you go sing Christmas carols to other people, and you just enjoy the season even more. There's nothing, it's better. It's not less. And then, though, if we as believers were ever able to step away from the way that our culture runs, and again, culture's not bad, it's just what? Less without Christ in it. But if we could ever celebrate Christmas like we're supposed to with Christ being the center, it's more, right? And so that's what we're talking about, because we can't get mad at children when we offer them a York peppermint patty and we say to them, hey, this is what Christmas is about, and we offer nothing better. What kid in their right mind is not going to take the York peppermint patty? But if we live what we sing about with the passion that we sing it with, and if we demonstrate maybe these 4, and there's others, but if we live those 4 spiritual disciplines, and we went to the 2-year-old or 4-year-old kid, and we said, which one would you like? Which one are they going to choose? Yeah, they're going to choose this. The problem is they don't think there's anything more than the way they're doing it. And so the challenge for us is not to eat more candy. I know some of you are taking that point. That's what you're taking out of the sermon. So we need to eat more candy. That's what Pastor Neil said. We need to eat more candy. That's not what I'm saying. as an illustration, okay? What I'm saying is that if we are able to ever live this Christian life like it's supposed to be, like you and I know that it's designed to do, it will be more, and people will be attracted to that. Yes, I know there's some evil people out there. There are, who stand against everything that Christ stands for, and there are people in the world that if they could wipe out Christianity, if they could come in here and do damage to us, they would do that. I believe that. But I think there's a lot of people who just don't know that they're settling for less when it comes to following Christ. And oftentimes we don't demonstrate that very well to people because we fuss and we fight and we argue about things as believers, and we don't really show much of the Christmas spirit, and we don't really necessarily understand what Christian may or may not mean. But if we begin to emphasize different spiritual disciplines, not that Christmas is bad. Christmas is not bad. It's just the way that we celebrate it may be less. Because our focus, our goal, our intention is to kind of follow this motto that I've come up with, is that instead of remembering the story of Christ's birth vaguely, because that's what's happening in our culture. There's this vague kind of understanding of Christmas, and there's this vagueness of that there's Jesus maybe, and he came. And instead of remembering the story vaguely in our own lives, what if we actually re-entered the story personally? Your family, my family, me, you, where we realign our reverence upon the Redeemer. What if we did that? Would that be living Christmas upside down, and would that cause people to consider maybe, possibly the Scriptures as we believe them and as we live for them? So today our topic is to spend less. Now let me just give you some cautions at the beginning. We're not looking at the spiritual discipline of spending less because we want to be cheap, okay? Some of you out there are cheapskates, okay? And I am one of them, okay? And so are you, right? I mean, that's what the song says. And some of you are trying to be as cheap as possible, and you're saving your McDonald's cup in your car after you leave, right? And you bring it back the next day because you get free refills. Some of y'all do that because they have to put signs up and say, you can't do this, which means what? Somebody's doing that, okay? And so this is not a sermon series and a sermon message for those of you who are cheapskates to go, yes, I knew that's right, okay? It's not about that. Neither is this a message about spending less simply because it is better financially, though it is. Do you realize that so many people are outspending what they're making? I know this may come as a shock to you, but this is even happening in government today. Did you know this? That there is an idea of spending more than they make. According to a recent survey, not surgery, but a recent survey, half of 3,000 people that were interviewed spend more than what they make at least 3 months out of the year. Now, if you're in sales and you're on commission, I can get that. That makes sense. But these people that were asked that, only 10% of those people who were doing that felt like they were living beyond their means. Only 10%. And if you don't know, it makes more sense to spend less just financially. Okay? If you don't know that, we'd like to talk to you afterwards about how all this kind of works, how the world works. But it is better to do that. But we're not going to talk about it being better because it is better financially. I'm not going to talk about that. It's true. I mean, if you save more, spending less, you kind of automatically save more, and that's a good thing over the long haul. But that's not the reason we do that. We do that because the way that we spend our money and the way that we approach money betrays what we really, really believe. And here's what Jesus said to us. In Luke chapter 12, verse 15, in a conversation, he said, "Watch out. Be on guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." But you know what our world tells us? It tells us that it does. And if we're not careful, you and I as believers will get swept away with the rest of this world, and the message that we bring to them will be invalid because they don't see it in our lives. And so what I want to do very quickly today, in the time that we have left, to concentrate really kind of quickly on just a few items, And let me just say this before I do that. I too struggle with this, okay? I too struggle with how much to spend, how much not to spend. How do we live in this crazy world? How do we protect ourselves in the future, and how do we live today? So I'm not just yelling at you. I don't want to just yell at you because I'm struggling with this myself. And I may not have any good solutions for you, and I don't have anything very specific for you to do or to implement when you walk out of this room, but I at least want to raise that caution flag for all of us, because there's something deeper going on in our own personalities and in our own humanity. I call them some sly lies about finances that really kind of impact us at Christmas time. Number one, it's this. We somehow have been taught now that presents are greater than presence with people. Somehow we have boiled this thing down, and instead of being with people, we would rather just sign a check or to buy something and send to them without the interaction of people. Do you know that today that you can pull out your smartphone, make a purchase while I'm talking, right? Have it sent to someone's house. They can receive that and send you an email back saying thank you. Now, is that bad? No, it's just what? Less. I was talking within the first service, and I asked some of them to come back, so I don't know if they did or not, but I asked them, do you remember the day that you just couldn't run out and buy whatever you wanted to buy? Remember these days? You remember that some of you may not remember this, but there was a time that you ate dinner at home, not because you wanted to, but you had no other option out there. Anybody remember those days? There was nothing open. There was nothing there. There wasn't a fast food after fast food after fast. You couldn't do that. And your Christmas celebration, you couldn't go buy like Garland. You had to chew bubble gum all year long, save the aluminum that is in there, right? You just put them in aluminum, and then you would make, anybody remember this? Anybody from first service? Anybody do that? I had some people in the first service go, yeah, I did that. That was how we made our star on our Christmas tree. We chewed gum all year long, saved the aluminum, and decorated that star. And then, this is dangerous. Don't ever try this. I mean, OSHA would not stand for this, but people would pop popcorn, and they would take a needle with string on it and risk infection without antibacterial wipes with them. Can you imagine the danger that this would happen? And they would stick it through popcorn, good popcorn that you could eat. They would skewer, they would bring pain into this popcorn kernel, and they would do that one after another, and they would hang that, believe this or not, they would hang that on the tree. Anybody do this? Remember that? Oh, I got some hands out there. And there were people in the first service that they would cut strips of paper, and they would make little chains. You know what I'm talking about? These are people that grew their own trees to make the paper that they would do this from. I mean, this is tough in the first service back then when they were growing up. And they would celebrate, and they'd put those things, and they'd put it around the tree, and they enjoyed that. And it was people around together. We don't do that anymore. We just run to Walmart, buy it, bring it home, put it on the tree. Is it bad? No. But are we missing something? Is there something less? See, I think we have substituted being with people and enjoying celebration and being there with each other with just conversation, and we think we've got to buy presents rather than presents. And you know what? That's been kind of fun as a culture. But if our culture does begin to decline, and we can't keeping to afford to buy newer and newer stuff, we may be forced by God himself to go back to those good old days. Something else, though, there's another lie. Not only are presents supposedly greater than presents, but somehow that cash equals contentment among us. They sent that Wish book when I was growing up, talked about it last week, that Sears and Roebuck. And Wish, that was about all I got on that, because I knew I wasn't getting any of that stuff on there. You know what I'm saying? And you got all these advertisements that come out, and all it does is to make you less satisfied with what you have. And the trick is they tell us that if we just have more money, we'll be happy. It's been really hard for me because I've been considering a car purchase during a sermon series where I'm saying spend less. And so that's kind of got me a little freaked out, a little worried about all those kind of things. And so I go to the car dealership, and I walk on the dealership, and I start talking to the guy, and I don't like to pay interest. And so I bring up paying interest, and the guy says to me, the salesman says to me, hey, man, money's never been cheaper than it is today. That's what he said to me. And so I looked at him with a smile and was thinking about Jesus and how Jesus would respond to a person like that. And then I decided not to do that. And so I said, no, sir, it's never been easier to get into debt today. Because we think if we buy more, if we have new, then we'll be content. But you're not going to be content, because when I go to a car dealership now and I look at cars and they show me the 2012s, you look at them and you go, man, that looks really good. And then they show me the 2013. You know? You realize they come out with a new car model every year. I don't know if you knew this or not. Me, after 2004, I didn't know anything else happened because that's what I drive. 2004 is like the end of the world. That's where it was. But I look at those things, and I'll talk to the guy, and I'll say, what's different about the 213 than the 212? Oh, it's totally redesigned. Really? Yeah, they moved the headlights over about an inch on this one over there. Okay, I sure can't be driving the 2012 with my headlight the wrong direction. It needs to be right here, and so you got to buy this new one because everybody's going to know. And so they begin to tell you that you can just have it all. Just have it all. It'll bring contentment. But you know what? That's a lie. Don't you know that's a lie? How many of you know that's a lie? Then why do we fall for it every single time? It's just like a drug addiction. But you got to have more and more every time to get the same effect, right? You buy your kid a shuffle, and one year the shuffle was enough. But now it's not enough. Now it's got to be the touch, right? And then it can't be the touch. It's got to be the Mac Pro. That's got to be the Mac Pro Premium. And we keep thinking we got to have more and more and more. John Rockefeller, one of the richest men in the world, was asked how much is enough, and he said just $1 more. You watch football coaches leave a job, they're only getting paid $2.5 million. Take another job, that's $2.9 million. There's never contentment in that. So here's what we want to do. We want to understand then that if we work the Christian life the way that it's supposed to be worked, then we will find contentment, because this world screams all it can that you can't be content with who you are. You can't be content with what you have, because we have something new and nicer and shinier and better, and you've got to have this. But the scriptures teach otherwise. The Apostle Paul in 1 Timothy chapter 6 is having a conversation with some of his friends, and there's a disagreement about some things and what you're supposed to do and all that kind of stuff. And he comes to verse 6 and he says this: there is great gain in godliness with contentment. Now I find this first verse fascinating, because when we're talking about godliness, we're talking really about spiritual things. Godliness is becoming similar to God, taking up the attributes of God, being all those things that He's taught us and taught us to be through Christ's coming. And there is that spiritual element, and yet that seems not to be great gain. Because if it was, this verse would say, now there is great gain in godliness, period. But there's not. It says there is great gain in godliness with contentment. Contentment is more or less what we have to deal with physically. It's not the spiritual aspect necessarily, it's physically. The stuff that we have, the stuff that we don't have, our health, our friendships, our relationship, all those things that are physical. And when you put those two things together, contentment, saying I've got enough, this is enough, I don't have to have more, enough is enough. When we have that plus our spiritualness, with those together, it is great gain. Here's our problem though. Many of us are satisfied with our godliness. Our godlessness. We're comfortable with that. Not many of us are striving to be more godly. We go, hey, I'm better than that guy over there. Hey, I go to church twice a month. Hey, that's all that I need. I don't need any more of that. And then we're not content with our physical stuff. We want more. Very few of us are content with our physical stuff and want more of God. But if we can bring those two things together, we can have great gain. For we brought nothing into the world. Do you see those little pictures of the babies? Aren't those cute? I love that picture of Will. He's got a blanket, got his name on it. He didn't come out with that, did he? Did he come out with that? That'd be a whole. We had to talk about that. If that happened, he didn't get any of that. Isn't it funny that God sends us into this world buck naked? Have you ever thought about that? I mean, the most humiliating thing possibly, that's the way we show up into the world with nothing on, of all things. Can you imagine that? And then you think that's bad enough. And we can not take anything out of this world. We leave it all here. Now, if my parents are listening, I want them to be careful with that because they'll leave a lot of stuff, and I want them to leave a lot of stuff. But they themselves, they don't leave, they go without it. But if we have food and clothing and a brand new car, right? If we have food and clothing and that new coffee Keurig thing that everybody's got that you got to have, $300 to make $4 coffee in your little cup thing right there. If you have that, if you have food and clothing and coffee, then you shall be content. Is that what he says? If you have food and clothing in a 2013 car, is there anything wrong with a 2013 car? No. If you can afford it, there's nothing wrong with that. Go get it. This is not anti-capitalism. If you can make money, make money. There's nothing wrong with making money. Nothing wrong with having stuff. But what's wrong is when you think that's life. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction for the love of money. It's not money. It's the love of money that's the root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves in many pangs. But as for you, believer in Jesus, flee these things. We know they don't satisfy us. We know they don't satisfy anybody, and yet we run to them. He's saying to us, no, don't run to that. Flee from those things. The value of your humanity is not tied up in how much stuff you have. If you've got a lot of stuff, that's fine. That's great. But your value as a human being isn't because you've got a lot of stuff, because one day, when we all show back up in heaven, none of us are going to have any stuff. And it's okay because God's got all of it. But here's what we're supposed to pursue: righteousness, godliness, faith, and love, steadfastness, gentleness. Fight the good fight of faith. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called and about which you made the good confession in the presence of many witnesses. So what do we do about this? I don't know what you should do about it. I struggle with what I am supposed to do about this. But here's one thing that we all could be or should be doing. We all should be looking at our budgets. Budget, what is that? Well, a budget is where you sit down and you decide where your money is going to go, because money's very interesting. If you don't tell it where to go, it goes. Right? It just kind of disappears, and you look around, what happened to that? And if you don't know, you don't know. I challenge all of us to live in what I call, and we'll talk about this later. In fact, in February, January, late January, February, we're going to introduce some Dave Ramsey studies, okay? I'm not completely convinced that Dave Ramsey's right on everything, okay? I'm not completely convinced I'm right on everything, although I'm really close. So what I want to do is to at least introduce that and talk about budgeting, because here's what I think we're supposed to live. I think we should live a 10-10-80 life, or a 10-10-80 life. If you're in Arkansas, it's a 10-10-80 life, all right? Here's what that is. The first 10% goes to God, because all of it's His anyway. He's only asking for 10% back. That's all He's asking. And then the next 10 is what you call saving, either for short term or long term. And then you live off the other 80%. And your 80% may be more than my 80%. That's fine. But if you adopted that, it's kind of a goal and kind of fun to live off less than the 80%. Because next week we're going to talk about that frees you up to give more. But budgeting is one thing. And then number two, some ideas. Rather than making a list of all the things that you don't have that you want someone to buy for you, why don't you make a list of all the stuff that you have? All the gifts you've been given. Many of us have storage units that we're paying for to store stuff that we can't store within our own house. What sense does that make? If it's something you need every once in a while, maybe. But why don't you write down all the stuff that you have? And then maybe, why don't you, these are just ideas. I don't know what spend less means. I'm not telling you what spend less. Spend less. Just do that. But maybe you need to make a list of all the people that you need to get a gift for, and then try to figure out creatively, not being a cheapskate, cheesesteak or something, whatever like that, all that kind of stuff. Instead of doing that, why don't you make a list of ways that you could honor and bless them with presents rather than presents? And then finally, this is kind of a radical idea. What if you just purchase one less gift this year? There's one less. For somebody who's going to get something that they don't even want. How many of you always every year open up a box and you look at it and you smile and you say thank you, and then you put the cover back on the box and you shove it underneath the bed? Or you go to eBay and you eBay it, or you go to re-gift it? You say, I know somebody who really could use that gift right there. Right? What if we just took one less purchase, one less gift, and did something different with that money? Why? Not because we're trying to not spend money and spending money is bad. Not because of that. Not because we're going to be better off in retirement because we would do that. Not for any of those reasons, but for the simple reason that if we take our emphasis off of all of this spending and buying and buying and buying stuff for people that we don't really like so they can have something that they don't want to impress all the people around that we don't even like. And yet, if we're not careful, we fall into that trap. What if in our Christmas season, instead of remembering the story of Jesus vaguely, giving us an excuse to spend money we don't have, why don't we re-enter the story of Christ's coming personally by realigning our reverence upon the Redeemer? Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? I'm not telling you not to buy gifts. I didn't say that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't shower your children with the wonderful blessings that you have. I'm not telling you that you should feel guilty because you have stuff. I'm not telling you to not earn a great living. As long as you're being ethical and you're fair and you're giving a customer what they want and you're supporting people along the way, then make as much money as you possibly can. All I'm saying is, why don't you consider spending less this year? Because what is really at the heart of this is our satisfaction with what Jesus has provided for us. And so today the challenge is for that. Now some of you are sitting there going, this is the craziest thing I think I've ever heard in my life. Who is a God like that? Well, I can tell you what, that our God loves us so much that he did give extravagantly. In fact, he's given you the greatest gift. If you repent of your sin and believe, you can get to know this God that you've been separated from. You may be living a life where you think what you've got is enough, and you're thinking, hey, this is great, but you're missing out on what Christ can provide for you. Or maybe you're a believer here today, and you've just, you know these things are true, you just haven't lived them. My challenge for all of us is, can we find contentment in what we have under the means that God has provided us and concentrate on our spiritualness? And could we find great gain in this season? We live in a culture which thinks if they keep spending money, they're going to find happiness. And it's just not true. And so what are we going to do about it? Why not let us lead the way and celebrate an upside down Christmas? Oh, Father, we thank you.